Mr. Palmer for 5 minutes.
Thank the chairman and thank the witnesses for appearing today. Attorney General Marshall, Alabama's economy depends on robust industries of agriculture, timber, energy, auto manufacturing, aircraft manufacturing. How would the ESG initiatives potentially harm the state economy and impact consumers, not only in Alabama, but nationwide?
I think first and foremost, Congressman, is on energy prices. If you look particularly what's driven inflation and what's hit Americans in the pocketbook, including Alabamians, it's been an increased cost of energy. Part of that attributable to decreased investment in what is currently producing the energy in our country itself. But beyond that, particularly, for example, within agriculture, is going to be the attack on agriculture as it relates to their responsibility, according to the left, for increased carbon emissions. Let's take, for example, our cattle industry. As you well know, that's a significant portion of our agriculture economy. We also know from data that cows themselves are the largest emitters of methane gas. And the question is going to be, do we find farmers discriminated against in their banking relationships? Do we see farmers discriminated against in other financial relationships that impact their ability to do their job? The reality is, Congressman, I don't think many in my state are ready to give up their hamburger. I don't think they're wanting to put tofu on their grill. The issue is whether or not we can produce the food products this country needs and to be able to do it in a way that we can make it affordable to Americans.
I don't think I'm willing to give up my pickup, or many of my friends who drive pickup trucks are willing to do that either. I want to point out something here. In this headlong rush to eliminate hydrocarbons from our economy, it's really insane. The very things that you have to build a renewable infrastructure, cement, steel, plastics, the majority of that's produced in China, but it all requires enormous amounts of natural gas. But there's one other thing that I'd like to point out. 83% or over 80% of the cost of fertilizer that is necessary for food production is natural gas. And if we eliminated natural gas from that process, it would cut world food production in half. And what we're seeing with ESG driven investments, I think is not only a threat to our economy, it's a threat to our food supply in many respects, but it's also a huge help to China. I made this point this morning in a speech that I gave, that this headlong rush to renewables that Europe engaged in created the energy crisis, not the war in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine exposed it. And if they were to go 100% renewable, they would no longer be reliant on Russia or the United States or anybody else for natural gas, but they'll be reliant on China. And that's one of the big concerns that I have about this big push to ESG is how this empowers China. Would you agree with that?
I do agree with that. And interesting, if you look at the history of energy transformation in our country, it's been driven by two sources, one of which is economic and the other is through technology. And it's usually taken a century or more for that to be able to take place. The current change is not driven by any action that this body has taken, but instead it's by global elites who believe there ought to be global energy policy. Not Congress acting, not those that are accountable to the people, but in fact, it is those outside of our country dictating what our policy should be. And it is benefiting China, who, by the way, is not as tied into the Paris Accord as many of our developed countries are. And it gives them an unfair competitive advantage over American companies as well by access to cheap energy.
Well, as I've pointed out in another hearing, China's objective is not to save the planet from climate change. China's objective is to rule the planet as the world's sole superpower, and they want to do that by 2049. And we have this artificial target of trying to achieve net zero by 2050, which under no engineering scenario, no technology scenario is achievable. So now we're getting down where ESG is not only a threat to our economy, it's a threat to our national security. That's my opinion. I believe that as we continue to divest ourselves from our hydrocarbon infrastructure and go more to renewables, it will make us reliant on China for the very materials that we need to sustain our energy infrastructure for our economy and our national security. Would you agree?
I would agree. I think we should have learned our lesson during COVID when we saw how dependent we were on products produced outside this country when we needed them during the pandemic.
Mr. Chairman, I want again thank the excellent witnesses, particularly the gentleman from Alabama. I yield back.